If I had $1 for each time that I survived a coup in 2023, I would have $1. It's not a lot, but oh my fucking god! Hi, hello, how's it going? It's Lo. You guys will remember on my last video on Brazil that I said the following. And if something major happens, every once in a while, I'll go back here to YouTube to catch you guys up on what's going on and how the transition is going along. And if something major happens, something major. Yes, I suppose you could call it that. As some of you may know, on January 8th, Brazilian extremists, far-right extremists, stormed the capital of Brazil, Brasilia, in an act people are calling the Capitol January 6, 2.0. It's worse than January 6, because imagine if during January 6, people stormed the Capitol, the White House, and the Supreme Court all at the same time. Yeah, that's what happened in Brazil. It will take a lot of context to explain what happened, what is going to happen, and what is going on right now, and I'm honestly confused on where to start, but I do think that it's important for people to listen to actual Brazilian people rather than to listen to random white dudes who call themselves Brazilianists because they have a degree from Harvard. So today, we're going to discuss what the fuck just happened in Brazil. But first, disclaimers. Same disclaimers of last video will apply, now with an addendum. I will send any comments defending the insurrection directly to the federal police. I don't have two shits left to rub against one another. I don't give a fuck. If you comment here anything that tries to somehow defend or try to understand why people did what they did, I have absolutely no time for you. You're getting muted, blocked, and your comment is being sent over to the federal police. Because God knows if you were there on January 8th. Because if you were, there's someone out there who is looking for you.
Shut down. Shut down.
Anyway, let's begin with what actually happened. The timeline of this is actually very confusing. So I'm gonna go back and forth, but our mark 0 in the timeline of the January 8th acts is not January 8th, is January 1st. Because that was the inauguration of President Lula. As I talked in my last video, we had a very harrowing election. Lula won very narrowly, and Bolsonaro lost. We were all holding our breaths collectively without knowing what was going to happen, if the results were going to be respected, but the results were respected. And on January 1st, Lula was inaugurated for his 3rd term as president of Brazil. The celebration of his inauguration was, and I'm not just saying this, Senor. I am not just saying this, but the celebration for his inauguration on January 1st was one of the most beautiful presidential inaugurations that I've seen in my entire life. Bolsonaro refused to hand over the presidential sash, which signifies the peaceful transition of power, and instead of having the vice president, which also refused because he's a military officer, we're gonna get there, because oh my god, fucking but instead of having, you know, the president of the Congress or the president of the Supreme Court to do this, he actually invited a group of people who represented Brazil to hand over the sash for him. So he invited Black women, he invited teachers, he invited indigenous people, he invited representatives of many different people to hand over the sash and to signify that the people was handing him back the power. This was very well received, and politically it was very well thought out. And so after that, And his speech was also incredible. Everything worked as it should, including security. And this is an important data that we're gonna need later on. But everything worked the way that it should. Everything functioned perfectly. The inauguration was beautiful. I sobbed my fucking eyes out. It worked out all right. And for a week, I was like, ha, what a joke. I won't need this shirt anymore. And then, as always, the reality of being Latin American hit me like a freight train. On January 8th, I was having lunch with my boyfriend. We were out and about, and he turned to me and he said, "Bro, did you see that there are people breaking into Congress right now?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Look at this." And I looked, and it was this. But how did we get here? How did our security fail so bad and so miserably that we had World Heritage buildings, which, by the way, Brasilia is a World Heritage site. I'm going to explain a little bit further why. But Brasilia is a World Heritage site, and we had people desecrating a World Heritage site for a project, a far-right project that was defeated at the urns and was defeated at the ballots. But people were storming those buildings and destroying those buildings in order to ask for something that the democracy could not give them, which is the return of power to Bolsonaro, which was rejected. So in order to understand what happened and the security breaches that happened, we need to go back in time a little bit, and we need to understand two major figures in this story. One is called Ibanez Rocha, and the other one is called Anderson Torres. The governor of the federal district where the city of Brasilia is located, it's called Ibanez Rocha. This is his second term as governor, and he's a close ally of Bolsonaro, like uncomfortably close. As per the Brazilian constitution, the security of the city of Brasilia is done by the governor of this federal district. Brazil is a federation, so our states have independence, and so does the federal district. From the curb of the official buildings to the outside, the security is done by the military police of this federal district. But from the curb to the inside, that security is done by either the legislative police in case of Congress, the army in case of the presidential palace, or the judiciary police in case of the Supreme Court. You also need to understand how Brasilia works to understand what a massive security breach January 8th was. Brasilia was a city that was planned in the 1950s. So this was a city that was planned with cars and roads in mind. This is an extremely car-centric city. I fucking hate Brasilia. I hate it. Here's photo evidence of me being fucking done with Brasilia. I hate Brasilia. I think Brasilia is a dystopian nightmare. I think Brazil is an anthropological study that went wrong. That city, like, you can't walk anywhere. Like, it takes you 1,000 hours to walk to any place in Brazil. It's not walkable at all. You need a car to do literally everything in that fucking city. I hate it. I detest it. I hate Brasilia. That was not relevant, but I just needed to get that out of my chest. All of the buildings in Brasilia were designed by an architect called Oscar Niemeyer, and this is why Brasilia is considered a World Heritage Site, because this is a peak example of modernist architecture. Oscar Niemeyer was also the man who designed the UN headquarters in New York City. He also designed the administrative city of my state, which is one of the second place that I hate the most in Brazil, the first being Brasilia. Needless to say, I'm not a huge fan of this dude. But that's just fucking me. I don't know what the fuck happens that everything that this guy touches, like, immediately becomes unable to be walked. Like, you can't walk anywhere. It's just like, it's hell. It's hell. It's hell. I am a very high proponent, very big proponent of walkable cities. So this is the opposite, the antithesis of everything I believe in I stand for. Anyway, you guys are not here for my remarks on the buildings of the World Heritage sites that we have here in Brazil, so let me move on. What you need to understand about this is that the downtown of Brasilia, the most important part of Brasilia, it's a part called Esplanada. So here's a map, and you have Esplanada, you have Congress, you have the presidential palace called Palácio do Planalto, and you have the Supreme Court. As you can see, they're all in the same area, in the same vicinity. Keep this layout of Brasilia in mind because this is going to be very important. Now, back to Ibanez Rocha. Ibanez Rocha named as his public security secretary a man called Anderson Torres. Anderson Torres used to be the Secretary of Public Security in his government before, but he was actually replaced because Bolsonaro asked Anderson Torres to be his Minister of Justice and Public Security. He was known for being a major Bolsonaro supporter, and he did pretty much everything that he could to keep probes into the illicit and illegal acts of Bolsonaro's children shut and not going anywhere. And there are many probes on Bolsonaro's children that should have gone somewhere. There was this one guy who bought 51 houses in cash. 51 houses in live cash. I lived 4 years of this. Ibanez Rocha was warned not only by people of his close circle, but also by Supreme Court justices not to name Anderson Torres to the position of Security Secretary once he was out of a job with the end of the Bolsonaro government. Supreme Court justices had a very bad impression of Anderson Torres' tenure as Minister of Justice, and they warned him that it would be a danger and a risk to put this guy in government. But Ibanez Rocha ignored all of the warnings. And on the 2nd of January, Anderson Torres was sworn in as Security Secretary of the Federal District of Brazil. On January 2nd, Anderson Torres became single-handedly the sole responsible for providing security to Brasilia. You see exactly where this is going, right? But don't worry, it gets worse than that. Both Anderson Torres and Ibanez Rocha were aware that there were massive protests being called for January 8th in Brasilia. The original plan, and if you recall the map of Brasilia, you will recall the Esplanada and the what we call Praça dos Três Poderes, where the three main buildings are. The original plan was to cut protesters' access from Esplanada up, and so technically, you shouldn't be able to reach the buildings because there was a huge stretch of land in the mean distance. And it's huge. I try to walk this. It's not doable. It's not feasible. It's not. You can't walk this, okay? There was also something else that we need to know, and that is that since the end of the elections, since the elections have been called, a sizable number of people have been camping out in front of army bases throughout Brazil. What they were asking for was for the military to intervene and actually change election results. They were asking for a coup. Specifically, they were asking for the military dictatorship back. And I will say, it was funny when they were singing the national anthem to a tire. In December, it began to become increasingly less funny. Because here's what happened. On January 12th, Lula was diplomated, or diplomado. This is a similar process to what would happen on January 6th in Congress. Basically, the Electoral Justice of Brazil would recognize that Lula was the rightful winner of the elections, and that diploma that he received would be enough to actually let him be inaugurated in the position on January 1st. On the 12th of December, there was a major ruckus in the city of Brasilia, and many buses were burned, and people started to realize that this was a planned attack that was sort of being created and thought in those army camps in front of army bases. But then on the 24th of December, on Christmas Eve, there was a bomb threat on the airport of Brasilia, and 3 people were discovered to be tied to it. 2 of them are already arrested, and what they wanted was to cause chaos in order to give the army an opportunity to act. So basically those army bases became terrorist nests, and it was becoming increasingly less funny to see those people there, and it was becoming increasingly more urgent to get those people out of there, except the army wouldn't let anyone pull those people out. But why would the military do something like that, Lou? Let me tell you something about 1964 in Brazil. In 1964, President João Goulart, who was rightfully elected by the Brazilian people, was deposed by a military junta that received financial and logistical support from the United States. That started a period of military rule that lasted until 1985, and that was a period where censorship was widespread, where political persecution was institutionalized, and political opponents were kidnapped, arrested, tortured, exiled, and murdered for daring to oppose the political regime that was in place at the moment, which was the military dictatorship. The military dictatorship ended in 1985 with the election of the first civilian to rule Brazil in over 20 years. And it effectively ended in 1988 when the Brazilian constitution, the one that was still used to this day, was approved to replace the 1967 constitution, which was the military dictatorship constitution. The problem is that we didn't have the best transitional justice, and so the military has always been a thorn at the democracy side. But with Bolsonaro, they once again were given the taste of power because Bolsonaro, like I said, was a low-level representative who never got anything really done in Congress. And when he got elected president, I'm not sure that he expected to be elected president, but he was, and he had absolutely no idea on how to run a country, so he resorted to the military, who, by the way, also has no fucking idea on how to run a country, and now we have 700,000 people dead of COVID. Thanks for the hookup. So it's once again like the Red Scare, except that this time there's an extra layer of Christian nationalism on top. So thanks for the hookup again, United States. So this was the context for January 8th. Lula won these elections, and ever since Lula won, there were increasingly more violent acts, starting on December 12th and then on December 24th with a bomb threat on the airport of Brasilia. Anderson Torres took office as security secretary on January 2nd. He immediately fired all of the team who was responsible for actually doing the proper security measures during the inauguration on January 1st and flew to Florida, where incidentally Bolsonaro is. On the 8th of January, Ibanez, according to himself, said that he received a message saying that everything was working just fine and that he could chill, that everything would be worked out properly. And then between noon, which is when he received this message, allegedly, and 3 p.m., which is when their attack started, something happened that changed the plans, and we still don't know what. What we do know is that the contingency of military police officers and army officers that were at the streets were suddenly pulled, and this meant that there were very few police officers in the streets at the moment that the horde started making its way towards the federal Congress. Not only that, but military officers escorted the protesters, or now we can call the terrorists. They were escorted from the army camp in front of the army base in Brasilia until the Esplanada. So they were escorted for over 7 kilometers in a 2-hour walk by the police in order to reach the place where they wanted to breach. When they got there, there were no police officers available that could stop over 4,000 people who were barging their way in. There were like 40 officers. Not only that, but some officers actively did not want to fight the horde. And there is this awful picture of police officers buying coconut water while the entirety of Brasilia is being looted and destroyed. So they get there, there's little to no resistance, they breach into the Esplanada, they reach the 3 buildings. So they start with Congress, move on to the presidential seat, which is Palácio do Planalto, and then to the Supreme Court. And what they did, I'm gonna let images talk for themselves.
Dos meus bisnetos, a história que vocês podem contar. Contem que a história, a casa é nossa. Entramos.
Muito gás, muita fumaça.
Quebraram a mesa.
Quebraram aqui tudo já.
Listen, I hate Brasilia, and I said that I hate Brasilia, and I stand by my hate of Brasilia, but I do have to recognize that Brasilia is an open-air museum. They fucked up countless, priceless works of art stole guns, and took a shit on a Supreme Court justice's table, because we aren't able to be original even on that. That office in particular belonged to one Alexandre de Moraes, or as we lovingly call him,
O Xandão. Xandão.
So I think that now we've got it. I was not expecting my tripod to completely fall apart during this, but it is what it is. Where were we? As I was saying before my camera so rudely interrupted me, we need to discuss Alexandre de Moraes, because I don't particularly like him as a justice, but he was responsible for holding our democracy together by the skin of his teeth. So in order for us to understand the role of Alexandre de Moraes, we need to understand the role of the way that the Brazilian judicial system works. Basically, you have the Supreme Court up top, and below the Supreme Court, you have several different superior courts of different justices, like labor justice, military justice, and the electoral justice. And the electoral justice is, like I said in my last video, the justice that is responsible for organizing elections every 2 years in Brazil. The Superior Electoral Court has 8 justices, 3 of which are Supreme Court justices. So the Superior Electoral Court is made of 8 people, 3 of whom are Supreme Court justices. The court is always headed by a Supreme Court justice, and in this time it just so happened to be Alexandre de Moraes. And he was laying it heavy on Bolsonaro because he recognized Bolsonaro for the dangers to democracy that he was. He started a fake news probe, anti-democratic probe, and whatever the fuck just happened on January 8th probe, I don't know how we're calling it yet. Bolsonaro hates Alexandre de Moraes because Alexandre de Moraes was going at the core of what makes Bolsonarism, which is fake news, hate speech, and badly formatted memes that your grandma sends to you, and you're like, Grandma, why has someone giving you access to WhatsApp? I swear to God, if WhatsApp had an age limit, we wouldn't be in this mess. The median average age of a person who stormed Brasilia on January 8th was over 50, okay? Anyway, the point is, Alexandre de Moraes became the justice that was the ultimate villain for Bolsonaro. And because he was heading all of these probes, he dealt with what just happened in January 8th. So here's an updated timeline. Anderson Torres was the Minister of Justice and Public Security of Bolsonaro until the 31st. And he was a minister that existed, as many people say, to clean Bolsonaro's mess. On the 2nd of January, he was sworn in as the Security Secretary of Governor Ibanez Rocha at the Federal District. On Saturday the 7th, Anderson Torres fired his entire cabinet and flew to the United States, where Bolsonaro is. Sunday the 8th, the plan was articulated to stop protesters from reaching the buildings by stopping protesters from reaching the Esplanada dos Ministérios. Around noon, Ibanez Rocha says that he made sure that the plans were in place. Between noon and 3 p.m., someone de-articulated all of the plans to stop the horde, and the insurrection starts. What happened right after? A lot of things in very quick succession. As the insurrection was taking place, so around 4 p.m., Ibanez Rocha fired Anderson Torres. Then President Lula decreed a federal intervention, which allowed the federal government of Brazil to take control of security in the federal district. This decree will last until the 31st of January. So as we speak, I'm recording this video on the 18th of January. The security of the federal district is still the responsibility of the federal government. After that, Alexandre de Moraes took Ibanez Rocha from his position as governor for 90 days. So Ibanez Rocha no longer holds a position. This happened in the early hours of the 9th. On the early hours of the 10th, Alexandre de Moraes had a arrest warrant out for Anderson Torres. Anderson Torres was in the United States, so that arrest warrant had to be negotiated, but here's where it gets funny. Because you see, they also had a search warrant for his house, and what they got to his house, they found this document that basically was a draft of an executive order that Bolsonaro would sign that effectively would give him the power to arrest Supreme Court justices and change the election results based on definitions of a junta made of 8 people of the military. So basically, in the span of a week, we went from, oh my God, what a beautiful procession of people handing back power to the hands of the people, to, oh my God, they actually had a coup to install another military junta in Brazil.
Hi, this is Editing Low.
There are a couple of things about this that I think I forgot to mention, but I think it's important to mention right now. One of the questions that we're asking ourselves is, why would Anderson Torres do this? What would Anderson Torres want by firing his entire team and not putting anything in place and causing something that effectively ended his career, because he doesn't have a career anymore? And there are many speculations, but one of which is that Anderson was allegedly with Bolsonaro wanting to create a situation of chaos that would justify the interference of the military, and that would open way for a military coup that would reinstate Bolsonaro back in place. People just think that he wanted to see chaos. Some people think that maybe he just didn't think that it was going to be too bad, but there are too many coincidences for it to be just that. And so the thing that investigations are going to have to show is what exactly did Anderson Torres do? What is the level of his culpability? Was Ibanez Rocha in it? Or was Bolsonaro in it? Who else was involved? Was this something that he did out of his own head? Or is there a larger ploy in order to let this happen? The army didn't act to protect the buildings that it should. The army didn't let people take away the people camped in front of army bases. So where's the army on it? Is the army planning another coup? What is the purpose of that army that plans another coup during democracy? What are we supposed to do? And I feel like I didn't mention this, but I have to mention that we have many more questions than we have answers. And if it sounds confusing to you guys, imagine how it is to live it, because it's very confusing to us as well. So that's just the interlude that I wanted to do while I'm editing and anyway. But here's the reason why we still have democracy in Brazil is because those people are fucking stupid. Because here's what happened. He admitted on Twitter to destroying evidence. He was the Secretary of Justice. He was the Minister of Justice of Brazil. Those have been some very long 4 years, I will say. Anderson Torres finally handed himself over to the police on the 13th of January. And as of today, he was meant to testify and he chose to remain silent. So he's so useless, he couldn't even hand me some juicy gossip for this video. Apparently, he's very dissatisfied with his cell because the couch there is in his cell is ripped. But if you know anything about the state of prisons in Brazil, including but not limited to the fact that once they started decapitating people, what I want to do is actually take a plane, fly to Brasilia, go to his cell and yell, "Hey, listen here, you motherfucker!" Anyway, here are some conclusions that we draw. Hello, editing low again. Another thing that I failed to mention is that over 1,300 people are arrested in connection to those cases. So after the things happened, they arrested 300 people, and then they arrested an extra 1,000 people at the army camp in front of the army base in Brasilia. There are still people being arrested for financing those acts. So if you are like small fish, Xandão is gonna come for you. That's what I wanted to say. But yeah, over 1,300 people arrested already for their connection with the acts. The first and most important is that the Brazilian military does not respect Brazil, because the Brazilian military is to the neck involved with this. The Brazilian military refused to put personnel on the streets and pulled personnel from protecting the palace of the Planalto, where the president is. The military is all fun and games until someone threatens to take away their privileges, and they feel like the democracy in Brazil is a mere concession that they've done to Brazilian people. For the Brazilian military, democracy is simply something that they allow us to have and not something that we've conquered. And in their mind, they can always take back the power that is theirs by right, because ever since Brazil became a republic, the military of Brazil has considered itself the rightful owner of the power of the people. They themselves consider that they are the ones who know how to run this country, and they are empowered because of the support they consistently received from the United States from 1950s on. And here's another thing that makes me very pissed, which is that if Trump had won the 2020 election, we would be fucked. And there is no beeping what I'm about to say. Because if Trump had won the 2020 election, we would be in a coup. I wouldn't be recording this video because we would be knee deep in a coup. And here is where people are like, Oh, but why are you so concerned with elections? Oh, aren't you a communist? Oh, I'm not gonna vote. Motherfucker, everyone who lives in the United States has the power over me. Because every vote that was counted towards Biden was a vote that made sure that I live today to see a democracy and not a dictatorship. This is what we meant when we say that you guys in the United States have so much responsibility when you go and cast your ballot, when you have so much responsibility to vote, because it's not just you, it's not just your country, it's all the world, it's everyone. And I'm just saying that from a very privileged position of I did not get couped this time, but even then the Democratic government in 2016 supported the coup of President Dilma Rousseff, which led us to the position where we are today. Because we keep interfering with our businesses, because the United States keeps interfering with everyone's businesses. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we have to live our entire lives wondering where's the next time that the United States is going to interfere with our stuff, because then, like, we can't plan for anything. We can't expect a better country than what we have. It's like our entire democracy lies on the whims of people who don't care about us, but care enough to make us be fucked for the upteenth time in our recent history. To the FBI agent watching this, this was not a joke, but this is free speech. Anyway, the second point that I wanted to make was that what happened in Brazil starts a dangerous pattern, which is fascists are here and they have been organizing for a long time. And as the left, we've given too much leeway to fascists. We've given them so much time to organize and reorganize, and now we're at loss on how to combat them. And then it comes to points like January 8th in Brazil and January 6th in the United States. It won't stop there. There will be other January 6th and 8th all around the world if we don't stop and articulate ourselves as a left to stop fascists once again. This is not going to be World War II, and we need to develop ways in which we can find the online battle, which is where this battle is being fought. We need to fight this online battle to defend not only democracy, but to defend our rights to believe in what we believe in. We are reaching a breaking point, and I fear that if we're not prepared, this is the time where fascism will win. And so I want what happened in Brazil on January 8th to be a warning, because it's going to get worse, and it's going to get way worse. It's going to get worse in Brazil, it's going to get worse in other places. And if we don't start to articulate ourselves, and if we don't start to organize ourselves, we are going to lose. And we are going to die, because these people want us dead. Anyway, this has been an update. This has been Brazil. Unfortunately, we still have a democracy in Brazil because the people who are trying to coup us are very fucking dumb. I don't like that. I don't want to hold the future of my democracy on a handful of people being too stupid for their own goods, because eventually there will come a person who is not stupid, and then we're fucked, and then we're going to be fucked. And so I am continuing to organize. I am continuing to doing my work here. I'm continuing to stay vigilant, because I haven't slept properly in a week. I had my first panic attack in years when this was happening, because I was like, I can't believe that this is not fucking over. And then I realized how naive it was of me to believe that a simple election would make this all go away. It will not. And it was very naive of me to think that. We have to keep struggling against fascism every single day. And I'm very tired, but there is no other way. We have to keep fighting. Anyway, the next couple of weeks in Brazil will be what we call dedo no cu e gritaria. We have absolutely no idea what's gonna happen next. Anderson Torres might just spill the beans because he says he's feeling abandoned. So if he spills the beans, then I don't know. I will make another update. I am not sure when or if I'm coming with another update. I just hope that there is nothing else similar to that insurrection, because I am enough said. Anyways, if you want to call someone to talk about Brazil and what happened in Brazil, call me instead of calling a random Brazilianist. Also, call just any other person who's living in Brazil rather than someone whose grandma was Brazilian and went to the United States when she was 6. Because some of us are still living here, and some of us are still going through it. Every single fucking day. If you want credentials, I'm a PhD candidate in law at the best law school in the country. So, you know, credentials. But yeah, if you learned anything from this video, or if you're just enjoying seeing my despair, you can buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. You can also follow me on Patreon to get early access to videos and decide shitty books to read or things to comment. But yeah, I will keep you guys updated on what the fuck just happened in Brazil, as always. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.